Welcome to Couplets, Michigan Poets on Poetry, a series of forums which feature two poets discussing different aspects of their work. My name is Joe Matusik, and I will be your host. The cliched image of poets is that of flowery types who sit around a lot, waiting for lightning to strike in the form of divine inspiration. In fact, most serious poets are articulate and well acquainted with their own processes of writing. Since poets are manipulators and shapers of language, we hope in the course of these discussions to explore and illuminate the way these artists do what they do, the how of it as well as the why. Since artists and writers influence the way we perceive the world around us, as do other forces such as advertising, television, and the like, it seems worthwhile to explore just how these influences work on us, and the exciting world of art seems, at least to me, a good place to start. Tonight we are lucky to have two poets who seem to have much in common as far as their approach to writing. I'm sure now they'll both proceed to tell me just how wrong I am, but here we go. Both have relatively recent work available in the Wayne State University Press Anthology of Michigan Poetry. KearnsWaksoki is certainly one of America's best known and most widely read contemporary poets. Her work has been widely anthologized, and she has over 30 books to her credit, the most recent of which is a collection of selected poems called Emerald Ice. She has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, an NEA Fellowship, a Fulbright, and is a 1988 recipient of a Michigan Council for the Arts Creative Artists Award. Diane is tenured at Michigan State University, where she has been since 1975. As well as a prolific and fascinating poet, she is known as a fearless and feared critic of poets and poetry, and certainly as one who never shies from giving her opinion, a trait admirably suited, I think, to tonight's program. Josie Kearns is director of the Visiting Writers Series at the University of Michigan Flint and has won 3 Hopwood Awards for poetry and a Michigan Council for the Arts Creative Artists Award. Her work has appeared in numerous magazines, including Passages North, Kansas Quarterly, Greenfield Review, and Cross Currents. She is completing her first book of poetry and awaiting publication of a nonfiction book next fall. As well as for her work, Josie is known as a tireless organizer of poetry events and champion of other poets. She, too, has no trouble voicing her opinions, and I fear my toughest task tonight may be getting a word in edgewise between these two articulate, marvelous writers. And that's why I do it to begin with. And now, could we have Diane read a poem to start us out?
This is a recent poem and is included in the Michigan Poets Anthology. I suppose I could say one thing, and that is I grew up in Southern California. After I graduated from Berkeley, I went to New York City and lived there for 15 years. And the one thing I never thought would happen to me would be to wind up living in the Midwest. Sapphires and emeralds in the mail. An aging boy blown into a giant mollusk, riding his snail bicycle madly, the frame bending under his poundage, his backpack bulging with used books, convinces me this town drives people crazy. His silky mind is frayed and stained like a blanket thrown in a ravine. He wants to play a game of chess with everyone to prove he's smart, when we all know he's smart. Want him to move out of the house with his nurse mother and his violent brother, get a job, and at 38 stop ranting about snobs, demographics, and evil book dealers. Once a month, I win a sapphire or emerald as I enter all the free contests that come in the mail, fantasizing blackjack in Atlantic City casinos and talking slot machines in Las Vegas. But in fact, what I win is pinpoints of carbon, black with a white streak somewhere, and dull green little nubs like pencil erasers that come in plastic bags saying, genuine. They are, I guess. But what to do with 11 black dots and now about 5 dull green erasers? My wall is papered with further announcements that I am a definite winner of yet another Tamiz Emerald or Cuisinart, VCR, Color TV, but those bigger prizes never arrive. Only, month by month, these tiny, dull stones, like spots of spinach left on a dirty plate. It is the Midwest, I keep saying. Your luck here is confined. The boy who carries his snail house life on his back has stopped doing anything but gaining weight and riding his strained, frantic bike. He doesn't even try to win these birdseed sapphires or smaller than a dried pea emeralds. He's stopped hoping envelopes will arrive addressed to him with awards or even from lovers or friends. I wait to win while he waits to be run over or die. Sapphires, emeralds, death. You are a definite winner of one of the above. I wait for mine to come in the mail.
Now, Josie, if we could. One, Paul?
Okay, sure. I guess the only thing I can say, that was wonderful. I guess the only thing that I can say is this arose out of a conversation where John was telling me that I should be more agreeable to people and I should not disagree so much. And this is sort of my answer to him, and I was also thinking about being an administrator a lot, so this is sort of my answer to that. It's called agreeing with everyone. At the filling station, the gas jockey complains about how it is. And I say, yeah, because I can see how it is for him. And the administrator tells me what a mess he's in, and I agree. And when a friend says, but what can you do? I don't know. I'm not an apple polisher, but I could see how you'd think so, as I listen like a sponge with continuous low blood pressure, a certain wander of the eye, so busy nodding and ah-hahing it through life that I catch a thief and understand how stolen property is a rude gift, especially mine. And when I interview the murderer and she tells me how she lit the bed, we talk about certain aromas of the epidermis as fine candles and the different qualities of kerosene and which burns best. And when the inquisitor comes for me with a knife and lays my spleen and kidney on the nightstand, we talk about how beautiful people are inside, how the reds and purples within us are the deepest on the planet.
I guess I'd like to start out by just talking about that old nemesis of writers, which, at least in my conception, I don't see either of you having, like writer's block. Is there like 5 minutes when you can't write, period, in your entire life, or what? I mean, those of us who are out here who have trouble getting 2 consecutive words onto a page look and we say 30 plus books. That works out to about, what, 5 a year? You know, like Joyce Carol Oates, who doesn't sleep but just writes novels. Is that you, Diane? Do you think, is that the type of writer that you are?
Well, that is the type of writer I am. I guess in one sense it's not a meaningful question for me because it's not as if I write every day. I'm a very spontaneous person who trusts my instincts. And it's true, I don't have constipation. But on the other hand, I don't feel like I have to write every day. And I often go, I don't think I've ever gone for a whole year without writing, but I can go for 3 or 4 months without writing. One of the things that has interested me personally over the years is that I seem to average about a poem a week all of my life, but I can easily go for 3 or 4 months without writing, and it doesn't disturb me or upset me. I write when I feel like it. I write when I need to, and I write when I feel like I have something to say that isn't something I've already said.
Do you think you go on like hot streaks where so that
Oh,
you're
definitely.
doing a whole bunch of poems all at once?
Yes.
Do those tend to be series poems, or are they disparate?
No, there's no rule. I mean, there are years where I really do write a poem every week, one a week. There are years when I write 60 poems, but they're all in 1 3 months period. There are years when I write 20 poems and then go for 2 months without writing. There's no rule for me. I don't know what that means. It's just
Okay.
the way I am.
All right. That means you've never had writer's block per se, I think.
If I were ever on call to write things, I could. One of the reasons I've gone to one writer's colony in my life. I went to Yaddo once for 3 weeks, and I hated every second of it. And it proved to me that if I wrote every day, which I did when I was there, that I didn't write any more good poems, or any less. That I simply wrote poems every day because that was my rule that I would, and I just rejected more of them.
Josie, do you work the same way, you think? Hot streaks?
Seems similar. It's funny because whenever we come up to a reading, it's like, well, I've got to get this one finished, but I'll feel like, oh, I haven't really been writing anything lately, and then I'll look through notes and I'll just have ideas. Oh, well, what have I been thinking about? And like recently, I've been thinking about Elvis Presley in headlines in the National Enquirer, and I'm getting ready to write probably something about, the best Elvis Presley stuff that ever happened, or or put or something on that, because I've been hearing a lot about
Elvis
it.
lands in a spaceship,
Elvis
steals a couple of...
Well, no, he's married to Natalie Wood in The Great Beyond right now, so the continuing story, but it'll be something that's striking me, and or if I haven't written something for a while, I think, oh, well, I've been thinking about this. And I'll write down like a phrase or something, and then I'll start going. And it may be that then the next day I'll have another poem. Well, I forgot about this. And it's funny because it's almost like, well, when it occurs to me that I haven't written for a while, I'll sit down. It's real strange. I mean, it's not...
It's a rhythm.
Yeah, it's a rhythm. It is, because you're saying that you had hot streaks, but then you could not write, or you could just like sort of be plodding along in a way, like one a week, or, but I tried writing in a journal, and I tend to write more. I tend to write down more things, but it's not really that, like, if you write every day. I think William Stafford said that he writes 4 poems a day. They're not great poems, but there's 4 poems, and so after a while you can call something, but it's almost when things occur to me to do it. Like if I'm really busy cleaning the house, I'm not writing then, but I'm thinking about it. It seems like, I guess what it is you're always thinking about something being written, or thinking about how it would appear in a poem. Is that true for you? I don't know.
Something that you mentioned, I have never written a book. I have published many books, but I have never written a book. And that occurred to me, you mentioned Joyce Carol Oates. Mm-hmm. Fiction writers sit down and write books. I think that's one of the differences between fiction writers and poets. I've even written a long book-length or ongoing poem, Greed,
yes.
But it's always been written in parts, so I didn't sit down and write it as a book. I'm now thinking, and have been for the last several years, about a project that I'm working on, which means to sit down and write a book, and so far I haven't sat down to write this book. What I'm currently trying to do is figure out how to put all the short poems I write into the context of this book.
Cheat, in other words, around the book, kind of?
Well,
or work at it from a way that you're used to dealing with
This is a project I've been working on for years, which is to write a long poem that's part prose and part poetry. And originally I thought the Greed poems, at least one part 10, which was never written, was going to be that. And that never happened. And the book I'm working on now, The Archaeology of Movies and Books, really does have that as one of its premises. The prose is epistolary, it's in the form of letters, and the poetry is embedded in the text. And I've found ways to make the narrative move through the prose, the letters, and then the poems be the lyric embellishment or statement. But that still doesn't satisfy my sense that part of the narrative should be carried through the poetic text itself, which still begs that question of can you sit down and write a book? I'm not sure that I can sit down and write a book. I'm still trying.
As kind of a segue then, I remember reading something Ezra Pound once said. He was talking about sculptors, and he was saying that there are two kinds of sculptors. There's a sculptor who gets a piece of stone and he sees something in it and he keeps hacking away until he gets to that image in the stone. And then there's a sculptor who takes clay and pushes it together and creates an image. I'd be interested to have both of you try to place yourselves. Which one of those would you see? Would you see yourself as either of those or both? I mean, how would you look at that in terms of the way you do things?
You go first.
I suspect the fact that they say people are either ocean people or beach people or mountain people, and you instantly know
Both
what you
people.
are. I don't feel that I'm either a clay person or a stone person. For some reason, that doesn't work for me. I'm not sure what I am.
Okay.
Do you mean like building up as
I'm a
opposed to
beach
tearing
person.
apart? I mean like that? Like carving away the stone and finding something embedded, like editing it out, taking the lines out, and then finding it? Or do you mean trying to build it up? You mean those two different
like
things, right?
seeing an image. I think he meant it in terms of seeing an image within the stone as opposed to creating an image
and putting it in the stone.
Not seeing it there first, in a sense. So
I've done it both ways. It's really funny because I remember Kenneth Rexroth talking about there being no such thing as the happy accident, and where it just works, it all comes together, and the muse comes down, and you have this great poem. And later I asked him about it specifically, and what he meant was, yes, that can happen in an incident, like suddenly it'll be there, but that just means that you've always been working on that. It doesn't mean that it all, it means both things. He didn't really mean that that doesn't occur, that experience. So what you're saying is very similar, like the image being there and then carving away at it or building it up. I do both ways. Probably though, with workshops and everything, I tend to have a bunch of like raw material coming out and then I carve a lot away. It's probably the one I'd go with. Even though later I might find, I forgot the arms. I'll have to go back and, like draw those in.
I would think of that.
Like I forgot
I would
this
think of
section,
that as
or I didn't
as a
tell
clay
I didn't tell the
kind
audience
of
that
thing.
part of it.
I would think of that as a clay thing where you're pushing it
Yeah.
together and then it
Then
becomes
cut.
something.
Yeah,
as
but
opposed
mostly I
to-
take away. It seems like I write it all out and then I mostly cut.
Okay, well let's segue into that then. Let's talk about your typical process of a poem. How would you describe it in terms of, say, from Genesis to ideally publication and worldwide acclaim? I mean, how does that work?
Right. Something will just hit me as really being odd. Like Maxine Hung Kingston was talking about once she got a story for an idea from the way someone's pant leg creased into a triangle. I think that's the story, where the guy was so, like everything was so perfect about him and so lockstep and calculated that even his pant leg creased into a perfect triangle. I think she was talking about that. And sometimes I'll start to notice something. You know how you learn a new word or you'll learn about something new and suddenly you see it everywhere? That's almost really close to the way that, and then I'll think, I should just sit down and write about this. I've been seeing this, and like get it over with almost, kind of. Although I like to sit down and write, but I just mean that it's something I'll be thinking about or it'll show up over and over again,
So what happens in it? You do that, it comes out perfect, and we live happily ever after?
Then sometimes, well, not perfect, but like I'll know, I gotta cut this. But what's always interesting to me, I don't know if this happens to you, is it happens in stages, and like I'll be working on one part of the poem and I'll know that some other part is really awful or terrible and I've got to cut it out later, but I won't be concerned about that because right now I'm working on the beginning part, or I'm working on one of the sections, and so I'm working on that a lot. So it takes me a long time to really finish something in a sense, because I tend to have like what do you call that when you can only see a part of something, like specific vision for a while, until like 6 months and then maybe I'll go back, but it's funny because it moves like that. It's almost like somebody will make a comment like you should cut this or you should move this, and I'll say, well, I'm not to that yet. I'll get really irritated. Not that I don't I don't agree with the criticism, but it's like I'll get irritated because, well, I'm not expected to be responsible for that yet. I'm still in this part, kind of. It's sort of like that. So it takes me a while actually to get it done, even though I send it out before it's finished sometimes. That's just true. But yeah, it's more slow. At least now I'm learning that it's more slow than I thought it was.
What
do you say about that? Does that make any sense?
KearnsWaksoki process of
Yeah.
getting a poem out.
I'm still thinking about Ezra Pound, your other question. I work for myth and archetype. I guess I don't think there's anything at all significant about my personal life, and yet I'm a totally autobiographical poet. And so the purpose beyond that paradox is that I'm looking for what is archetypal or mythic in my life that I know enough about that I can talk about. So in the poem about sapphires and emeralds in the mail, I'm always working with the myth of feminine worth being connected with beauty, and fairy tales are about worth being turned into royalty and rewarded with jewels. And in female mythology, that worth is almost always sexual, the sexual jewel, and it's almost always acknowledged by the male or man. So my jewels come in the mail, except that they're these worthless jewels, and they come in the M-A-I-L instead of through the M-A-L-E.
Yes.
And the M-A-L-E in the poem is the person who can't even acknowledge his jewels. He is a very gifted poet in terms of male. For me, the process of writing a poem is finding something that attracts me, and I guess this is where I am intuitive. I trust my processes. I think when I notice something, I think I'm an old-fashioned Freudian. I think I'm noticing it because it responds to something in my unconscious, and I'm a Jungian in the sense that I think that those things in my unconscious are the archetypal stories and myths. And what I have to find, this is the sculptor who is looking for the shape in the stone that Pound talks about. I have to keep chipping away until I find the story of Cinderella, or the story of Sleeping Beauty, or the story of the Three Fates, or the story of the Cap of Darkness, or whatever. And I am interested in images, I think because I'm a 20th century American materialist, but I see those images as the icons or totems, or whatever you want to call them, that are emblematic of where I'm going to find the myth or the story that they signify. And I decided when I started working on the archaeology of movies and books that my two myths were the myth of Oedipus and the myth of Medea. And I still haven't figured out how to put those two myths together, which is part of the reason why I can't sit down and write my book. Because in the Oedipus myth, I'm not sure if I'm Oedipus or Oedipus's mother. And maybe I'm both, but I'm not sure of that. I know who I am in Medusa, in Medea. That was a good slip. I definitely know who I am there.
But see,
I am not Perseus wearing the cap of darkness. I am the lady with the snakes on her head. And
Another good feminine symbol.
yeah, but the Medea story has been my story, except that I identify with the very pagan version of that story, where she escapes because she's a sorceress and goes to another land, and not the tragic version of the story where she has to kill herself as a result of the whole proposition. So I still don't know what to do with those two stories, and therefore I do not know how to write this poem, even though I'm writing it. And I guess in that sense, I am your stone sculptor chipping away, trying to find where that shape is. I see places of it over here, and I see places over here, but I don't know what its final form is going to be. And I'd like to know, and I'd like to just choose one, but I can't.
So the process happens for you when you can figure out where you're at in the scheme, almost, so that then you know where to speak from.
The pattern, yeah.
Yeah, the pattern that you're into. Yeah, like, am I the victim or am I the perpetrator? Yeah,
right.
okay.
What
Yeah, that
role
makes
am I
sense,
playing?
yeah.
Am I the magician or the martyr?
That's a lot. That's a
Break down
problem.
for a minute, Josie. What sort of myths obsess you very quickly?
Yeah, good.
Oh,
Any?
Jeez.
Well, not...
Well, yeah.
Okay. I mean,
Rapunzel, which is really strange for some reason, but Rapunzel, and I think the myths that really obsess me more than any are the ones where there's a failed love. It's almost like I don't want to believe in failed love, even though I've got lots of examples from real life and things like that. I don't want to believe that there's. I almost want the lovers to come together at the end at some point, or to have a resolution where there isn't any, like in Rapunzel, his eyes get gouged out, and I mean, I almost and I know, and it's like, yeah, but what happened later was always my question, like so his eyes got gouged out, and it's like, no, that's the end, or I want to know what happened, like after they moved to the suburbs, after he got the eye operation, what happened, and so I'm sort of trying to get to that point, like, well, I can agree with everyone, it's sort of extending beyond, the myth extends beyond what the initial incident was, something that happens all the time, and then you keep going with it almost.
The story of Rapunzel is about being imprisoned, though, and it doesn't sound to me like that's what interests you about Rapunzel.
Well,
I'm going to cut you guys off, or we're going to extend beyond the extent of our tape. Josie, could you start us off with a poem?
Sure. This poem came out of a childhood sort of myth that I was interested in from the title of a movie. Okay. River of No Return. In truth, it was a mushy movie with Monroe and Mitchum. It was about love. We wanted something to rush over us and take us without thinking. We wanted something. Years later, I saw it while riding by on a city bus. The creek that ran under the highway displayed two events on its sloped marquee. On one side of the river was a flowing pink nightgown. You had to wonder how it got there. Someone dreaming too hard, a spirit lying down, then forgetting to dress. This could be about love, a rendezvous swim, the lovers waking up safe in different beds, one without her gown. On the other side of the river, a woman's body with no shoes was lying enchanted near the water. She was what they were now screaming about, her body pale enough to be that spirit, sleepless lover, as if white light from an old movie shone on her face. Excuse me. What's the ending of that?
Diane, could we induce you to do the same?
Well, this is a continuation with my obsession of what the archetypal role of woman is, her definition by her beauty or her sexual attractiveness. It's called Ode to a Lebanese Crock of Olive, and it was written for my friend Walter Hamidy's Aunt Libby, who used to send him care packages of wonderful food from Lebanon, thinking he could never eat well in the United States. As some women love jewels and drape themselves with ropes of pearls, stud their ears with diamonds, band themselves with heavy gold, have emeralds on their fingers or opals on white bosoms, I live with the still life of grapes whose skins frost over with the sugar forming inside, hard apples and delicate pears, cheeses from the sharp fontina to icy blue, the aromatic chèvre, bourseau, boursin, a litany of thick bread, dark wines, pasta with garlic, soups full of potato and onion, and butter and cream, like the skins of beautiful women, are on my sideboard. These words are to say thank you to Walter's Aunt Libby for her wonderful olives, oily green knobs in lemon that I add to the feast when they get here from Lebanon, where men are fighting as her sisters have been fighting for years over whose house the company stays in, and whose recipes for kibbeh or dolmas or hummus are passed along. I often wonder, had I been born beautiful, a Venus on the California seashore, if I'd have learned to eat and drink so well. For with hummingbirds outside my kitchen window to remind of small elegance, and mourning doves in the pines and cedar speaking with grace, and the beautiful bodies of lean blonde surfers dancing on terraces, surely had I a beautiful face or elegant body, surely I would not have found such pleasure in food. I often wonder why a poem to me is so much more like a piece of bread and butter than like a sapphire. But with mockers flying in and out of orange groves, and brown pelicans dipping into the Pacific, looking at camellias and fuchsia, an abundance of rose, and the brilliant purple ice plant which lined the cliffs to the beach, life was a still life for me, and a feast. I wish I'd known then the paintings of Rubens or David, where beauty was not only thin, tan California girls, but included all abundance. As some women love jewels, I love the jewels of life. And were you, the man I love, to cover me naked with diamonds, I would accept them too. Beauty is everywhere, in contrasts and unities, but to you I could not offer the thin, tan, fashionable body of a California beach girl. Instead, I give the richness of Burgundy, dark brown gravies, gleaming onions, the gold of lemons, and some of Walter's Aunt Libby's wonderful olives from Lebanon. Thank you, Aunt Libby, from a failed beach girl out of the West.
Since that's from your latest collection, Emerald Ice, selected poems, I'd like to ask about the process you went through selecting them. Was it tough or easy to go through and leave so many out of 30 books to get down into one?
Basically, I am not an anal retentive person. I'm happy with what is there, unless it just completely does not fit my idea of the pattern. The publisher told me that I had complete control over it. I have one very devoted disciple who read every single word I've ever written and made a list of what he thought should be in it, which was about 9,000 pages long. And another friend, an editor and poet, Clayton Eshelman, who made a list, but which included some eccentric things, and I basically followed my editor's dictate, which was try to put an equal amount from all the periods of your writing and publishing, and don't stint on the early poems. So I think there's actually a very even gathering of poems from the early to up until just before the last book of poems. And no, I didn't anguish over it.
No, you didn't anguish over it?
I decided not to write an introduction because I decided the minute I would write an introduction, I would start anguishing over what should or shouldn't be in it.
Do you anguish over individual poems? while they're in process?
No, I only anguish over people not understanding my poems. I anguish over individual poems thinking, could I have said this so that everyone would really understand what I am talking about? But
Do you use other poets, other writers as sounding boards? Traditionally, a lot of people have, sent them through the mail. We get it back, and we say, this is great, but you have 6 months to go on it. Why don't you get somewhere? Are you one of those people who works on their poems by correspondence with their peers?
no, I envy people like that. I have always used poetry readings as a kind of sounding board for me, and by that I don't mean applause meters, because I don't necessarily think the poems that everybody likes are the best poems. In fact, they're usually the trendiest poems, and for that reason sometimes they seem very dated 10 years later. Not always, though. I can't describe, I've tried over the years to describe what it is that makes me think I understand why and how a poem is working if I read it aloud, but for some reason it's not audience response. I think it's because I am a very oral person, and I think I hear and feel continuities, and I'm really obsessed with pattern, as you've figured out by now. I want the surface to have a pattern, and I want it to form a grid over another pattern that works on another level, and I guess I need some kind of orality to help me see how something is working. I'm also very aware of how you can take a poem that does not work on the page and make it seem very amusing, entertaining, or dramatic by reading it aloud. And I think that's not what I'm talking about.
Josie, do you have the same kind of physical, since that's what we're talking about, reaction when you're reading pieces aloud? Is it in the throat? Is it in the body when you feel something, a line is right or a phrase is wrong or a poem is wrong?
I don't know. Sometimes it's almost visceral. It's like when you say a line and you know it's not right, or you know it is right. You can almost. I always think of the undulation of an hourglass, placed sideways, where it's rolling almost, kind of like, and you know that it's rolling right. You were talking about pattern earlier, and it kind of, has a beginning, a middle, and an end, which sounds silly, but you have like a strike point where you grab the reader and pull them in, and then you take them where you want to go, and then you leave it out, and you have not a moral but a closure almost on it. And it's funny because I was thinking about writing endings of poems differently than what they're written, and it's really sound quality. It makes it sound like it's done, like an ending. I don't know if you find that or not. Like words like one syllable instead of two, or things like that are really
masculine
important.
Masculine or feminine endings in terms of consonants and vowels.
Yeah, it's surprising how much that's, and you'll know it doesn't sound right, and then you'll think, oh, it's because it's this other.
But by the same token,
another ending.
You very much do rely on other people's inputs in your poems, right?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, not always. Just.
I don't listen to them at all. No. Well, I try not to recently. In a funny sense, I try to not listen to why. I'm trying to not listen to why they think it's not working or it is working, but whether they think it is or it isn't, and then I'm trying to figure out how I can work within a frame that they're putting it in. Like if somebody says, "I don't get this because obviously you're too involved with blah blah blah," I'm not really going to listen to that, but I'm going to listen to this isn't working for me. And not necessarily the reason, sometimes, because sometimes that doesn't have anything to do with, they may be right for them, but it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm trying to express, like I wish I'd said it better, or maybe I'm not putting into the poem what I should be putting into the poem. Kind of like what you were saying in a way, too, about, like is there another way I could say this, almost like that.
Could you read an example of a piece that has undergone transformation, and could you describe perhaps after you're done reading it, what limbs have been lopped off? I mean,
I'm not going to read the parts that have been lopped off.
Well, no, I just mean.
But I can remember one. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, this one. If you want to talk about publishing, was rejected a lot. Even though at readings people liked it, but it got rejected a lot. And This is really, yeah. And one of the editors, I won't mention her name, but she said that it was because it was too vulgar at the beginning, which I thought it's not either. But it wasn't that it was too vulgar. It was that it was information you didn't need. Really, was what was going on. But it was striking her that it didn't belong in the rest of the poem, which is right, or which I later thought was right. And then another editor said, "This is great. We're going to take it, but take off this first part because the poem really starts here," which I'm going to read now. It's called Aunt Florence. Visiting a relative whose fate had not yet been diagnosed, it is Florence who gulps down 2 barbiturates without water, marches into the white room and says brightly, "My God, honey, I hope you don't have a brain tumor." She and my stepfather once took turns trying to pull a telephone out of the wall. I think they wanted to deny each other the satisfaction of calling the police. She was fire, her auburn hair curled like leaves, chain-smoking, smoke curling above her head in fists, while he was a tidal wave, grown mad with volumes of whiskey, an alien, his face blue with explosion. Both survived the hollering, arms slung around shoulders, crying at the end for their children. His son sees him only on weeks Dad has seen the psychiatrist. Her daughter does not attend family functions. They miss out. On Florence's 5th marriage, as the license was written, her fiancé expressed amazement at the number of former husbands whose names she wrote out by hand. She paused, glared at the newcomer, said, "Listen, damn it, I was in demand." That's sort of a character sketch. But what had happened is there was like a 1, 2, 3, 4, third section or 5th section that sort of didn't add anything, and the original section, what started out, which I thought was a very funny line, was at the open house, Aunt Florence French kisses my boyfriend, and it goes on about losing teeth, false teeth, and things like that, which is funny, but actually the real character sketch starts with what she would say to a relative who is in the hospital and doesn't know what's wrong with them. You know, it really, it said to me later, it really started there. And I didn't listen to the one editor who wanted me to take it out because it was vulgar, because I didn't think that was right. So I left it in. And then the next editor said, "No, it's not vulgar, it's just that it doesn't, it starts later. You know, get them right away, almost." So it was kind of strange.
But that's an interesting example of the kinds of soundings that Diane was talking about in terms
because it's pounds sort of in the beginning.
In terms of the soundings you get from other people and whether they're on or off the mark.
Yeah.
In terms of whether they're useful for you or not.
I thought something might have been right about what she said, but I didn't agree with her reasoning, I guess, is more of it. Yeah.
You think that the fact that you didn't agree to her reasoning kept you from looking at?
Yeah, so
perhaps
like,
whether she had a point?
I kept leaving it in and sending it out, and it still didn't get published until this one editor said, "No, just cut this." It had a good reason for why, but it was almost like getting in the way. So what I was saying before about, I'm trying not to listen to people's reasons why something shouldn't belong, but just the fact that something's not striking them right. I'm trying to listen to that more than what the reason is, because it may not. In fact, they may say it right, and it may not make sense to me. You know, the way that I'm listening to what I'm writing, almost.
Okay. I want to take a quantum sideways leap, sort of, I guess. And I want to ask, Diane, who was it you called the devil in the American Book Review?
Oh, yeah.
John Hollander.
John Hollander.
Yes, that's right.
Do you like doing that? I'm sure that must have been calculated to get the kind of reaction that it certainly did.
Well, I explained that it was, I didn't call him, I was comparing him to Lucifer, the fallen,
you did call him,
and that he was someone who had all the powers of extreme godliness who chose not to use them, and was very, it seemed to me, fiendishly not using them in the particular occasion that I cited. And I think he's even come to be contrite about that, since he is a brilliant man.
I bring that up as sort of a, how shall I put it, a rather blatant example of your opinionatedness, since you certainly aren't shy of expressing your opinion of other poets. Pros or cons, and I think that gains you a great deal of respect as well as a great deal of disagreement.
I was writing an article about the state of American poetry, and I cited an occasion where a very prestigious man with a lot of power and a lot of reason to feel that the world loved him behaved in a very fiendish way because there is a kind of craziness in the world of poetry right now that makes even people in godly positions seem to fear their shadows. And
Why do you think that is?
this was the beginning of an article called "The New Conservatism in American Poetry," which I've now written a third installment to, and I'm fascinated by the fact that we live in an intellectual establishment where the word conservative is a bad word, and even people who are conservative in every accurate and precise meaning of that word still want to be called liberals, or somehow feel that it's a bad thing. And what I continually have as my subtext, as we call it these days, is that it doesn't really matter to me whether you're right-wing or left-wing or what you are, but it seems to me the one thing you can't afford to be if you're an intellectual is dishonest about assessing your position. And if it's necessary to look at it in a linear place, then you should see how much of the past you're trying to preserve and what ways you're trying to preserve it, and how much of it you're trying to overthrow and what about it you want to overthrow, and position yourself someplace where you can understand what that is. But it seems to me that people who know nothing about the history of poetry are pretending that they need to return to the sonnet as if there's some kind of return to form when they never knew what form was in the first place. The case of John Hollander was a man who was ridiculing free verse as if somehow it was an occasion for people to have orgies in universities, and certainly he's a man who knows better than that, and sort of was behaving like a fallen angel, catering to a strange version of dissatisfied academics in the audience who are happy to titter at his kind of dumb jokes about all the illiterate and practically unwashed and stupid poets who were teaching in universities. It was
I did bring that
a
up
maddening occasion.
I did bring that up for a reason.
Yeah.
Okay, because clearly you don't place yourself in the conservative vein. I mean, that's fairly obvious. You
No,
consider
I'm a
yourself
mysterious
from
creature.
the
I'm more
witness-
Apollonian than Dionysian, but I'm the person who is the champion of the Dionysian tradition. But it's because I am so Apollonian that I can see it so clearly and organize it so well and talk about it so concisely. I mean, the irony is that someone like John Hollander feels envious of the so-called, unwashed like myself when he teaches at Yale and he wins prizes and he has a kind of success that we unwashed will never have.
Well, there's success and power, of course, which are two different
I was going to mention
issues.
power, yeah.
Right?
I mean, it sounds like...
Well, he has far more power than certainly I will ever have.
In his poetry, would you buy that one? I mean, because that's really what the issue
Well, his
is.
poetry is published by Johns Hopkins Press and has won more prizes than my poetry has ever won, and gets reviewed in such places as the New York Times Book Review, which I suspect my selected poems will not. So, it's hard to say what he really is envious of. He's very Luciferian.
Would you, Josie, consider becoming a conservative writing sonnets?
Are you calling sonnets conservative?
I'm using Diane's definition,
Oh, okay, yeah.
which is
I'm just being silly.
I began my poetry life by writing sonnets, so it's,
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, when I was taught poetry, I mean, I wasn't taught the way I would have liked to have been taught poetry. I was taught poetry of the 16th century. 17th century, I was taught all that, and that's what I thought poetry was, but I liked it anyway. And I didn't realize that you could, I didn't realize that you could, and I liked Poe for a long time, and so I wrote like that, and I thought that was the only way you could express yourself. Then I found out that there were people who were alive that wrote poetry, and that there were different things going on, and, oh, what an amazing thing. And so, and I could write in my own language, which is postmodernist 20th century American, which is not right, although you do have iambs and trochee and all that. I mean, you do have rhythm in language and meter, and in conversation and in the newspaper and all of that. But so, I'm traditional in the sense of I think the title should do something. I think the beginning should do something. I'm sort of in that sort of, conservative.
You're a new traditionalist?
Well, what I like
from
is...
the free verse?
No, but what I do like, too, or what I really envy writers who can take a form like that and break it and can make it still adhere to the rules but yet sound like something else. I really admire that. I think that takes a special knowledge of the language almost to be able to do that. There's, let's see, Tom, who wrote Spermatozoa? I can't think of his name now.
Tom Clark?
Tom Clark, yes. And that's a sonnet, and it's nothing like other sonnets, and it breaks the form in a sense, and it does it that by itself. For myself, I like to think that the form comes out of the content a little bit, but if I use repetition or something, but I admire people who can take the tradition and change it.
But you don't really have any great need or desire to do that?
I've tried villanelles, even recently.
I don't mean in terms of trying. I mean in terms of clearly there's a move back in a lot of published poetry to traditional forms.
But even if you look at like X.J. Kennedy, who's pretty conservative in his writing in that sense, he still writes well. He still writes comparisons and metaphors. He still writes, there's still things like that work in that sense that are traditional things. I'm for the new, of course. Because I want to see what's going to happen, more or less. But I don't see a need to, like, if you don't write sonnets, then you're not a real poet. I don't think that's valuable, just to say that.
It's kind of a nice and interesting twist on the great unwashed who feels a poem has to rhyme, kind of thing, which we've gotten used to.
But it doesn't mean that rhyme is totally terrible either.
Of course not.
You can swing both ways. I don't mean there are no standards, though. It sounds like that, doesn't it? That's not
but
what I mean.
You come from that precise tradition that John Hollander is basically referring to. You are on the tail end of the traditional teaching methods, and to you, free verse is as natural as rock and roll to a certain extent, right? It would not be natural for you to write sonnets. It would not be natural,
I don't know,
given your background.
Yeah, but don't you find? I don't know if you find the same or not, but I find that the more I try to be, new or something, the more I find that I write traditionally. When I look at forms and the subjects and things like that. Do you find that?
I think it's an interesting.
Almost the more that I try to be experimental, the more I'm, lately I'm looking at it that way.
And you want to. I think that's an interesting kind of discussion, because we have a lot of poets out there trying to do their own traditions, right? That's what we're talking about, and it's a matter of where you're placing yourself within the spectrum. We have Diane allying herself with a Dionysian, right?
Well,
and we have
no,
we have Josie.
Well, I'm probably more like Walt Whitman than Emily Dickinson, although.
I think so.
Don't you wish you could do Emily Dickinson? That's what I mean. Yeah, I guess that's what I think.
Well, I don't think my poetry's that different from Emily Dickinson, but if I had to say that I came from one line or the other, it's the Dionysian.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd say the line we're from here is from Couplets, Michigan Poets on Poetry, here live from Buckham Alley Theater.